All right. Welcome to Ben and Ryan Show, episode 3. We are gaining an understanding of what we are doing. The first week we were surprised by the microphone, by the recording button, and this week we got that down. Week 2 we got that down.
We're pros at recording now.
And then our post-production team, they added some cool rocking music to our intro. And I realized on episode 2, we did not react to that properly. So I added you couldn't necessarily see it because the light takes out my hair. But it was all over the place. The studio does that.
It's very exciting.
Yeah. So we are on episode 3. I'm Ryan Brown, joined by Ben Nadell here.
Howdy.
And we are going to freeform it today. So last week we had a guest. We had Justin Scott on. We had a lot of great content with him. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. And this week it's gonna be Ben and Ryan just kind of chatting about life, and in the business world. So I'm gonna throw out something that I just went through, and we talked about this. I think it was in the first episode. We weren't sure if my house was going to be around because of the hurricane, and we did make it through. We did make it through.
Congratulations!
Thank you. But so the company, we're based. Most of us are down in Florida in the same area, but we're also all over the country, with various people, and as the company's grown. And so as we were looking at our DR plan, we realized something, that we had the IT piece down, where we had servers in multiple locations we could roll over or fail over, and all that was set. And I think most companies, or I shouldn't say most, but a lot of companies have that, or that's their thought, is DR needs to be, how do you handle the IT side of things?
Right. That's the goal everyone is going for.
But our post-mortem, we realized there was holes in our non-IT plan. So I want to kind of throw that out there to Ben. And have you ever thought about the non-IT aspects of your DR plan?
I will say right up front that I am very lucky that I've never really had to think about any aspect of disaster recovery, because typically at my company, that was the purview of the ops team, the platform team. I think we had a disaster recovery plan in place. I don't exactly know what the details were, but certainly when I have thought about it, I have only ever considered it from a failover standpoint. Are we failing over to another cloud? Do we have our database backups offsite? How many days of backups do we have? I've never really ever considered it from the people standpoint.
Yeah, we found that from a sales aspect. Okay, hey, if we do have salespeople who are outside of Florida, and we're not a regional company, so when we do business really all over the world, and mostly in the U.S., or I say U.S. and Canada, but there are some other countries as well that we get out there. So how do we make sure that we have someone answering the phone? Because we had, in hurricane, we had people out of power for days, and myself included. And if you don't have that, your cell phone's going to be dead pretty soon. Your laptop battery is going to be dead pretty soon. The gas station down the street that may have power is going to get tired of you hooking up to them. So what do you do? Or your car, I guess you can depending if you can keep gas in it and stuff like that. But that's where we didn't have it, and so we learned, hey, you know what? It's something that we need to think about, is from a sales and support aspect of things. How do we fail that over and make sure that the people who are not affected have the ability to handle that?
So, I mean, do you have any thoughts? Have you discussed it internally, what a possible plan would do? Because I imagine if you take the soul out of people and you treat them as machines, and you think about it the same way you would think about a hardware failover, would it be that you just make sure you have a distributed workforce where you always have people in certain roles in disparate places within the country, so that if Florida were to be unavailable because of grid issues, that you would always have salespeople and support people based in other states? I mean, is that the general ideas, or is it more about getting people in Florida to have power and connectivity?
Both. It's so that when we're looking at it, there are people who in the organization who had generators,
Mhm.
And so we know that they could be online.
You did, but you
Um,
still might have to have like a satellite phone. I mean, as someone who has not been through a hurricane, I I don't understand all the implications of losing power. You know, I don't know the breadth of what it means to lose power. Is it
okay.
also the cell coverage? Is it also I don't know, all of the infrastructure? Are you saying that even in a hurricane, there's typically cell coverage? You just might not have power to access it.
There is some cell coverage. So I had to actually, for cell coverage, there generally is not cell coverage in my neighborhood. So I had to drive, or at my house, I should say, on like the major road next
Yeah,
to it.
I'm in such a dead zone at my house too. I have to do
Yeah,
everything internet calling. I mean, even my iPhone, there's an option in it for calling via the internet.
yeah. So that's the solution.
Mm,
Actually, so if you have power, you can get then your Wi-Fi turned on, and you have Wi-Fi calling. So that's
gotcha.
how, or you just use your Wi-Fi for any internet needed. So you have that out. And actually, so kudos to iPhone. Their satellite service. When the first day, I hadn't gone to the gas station yet to where I could get a service, but I was able to do the iPhone satellite where I
Wait,
moved. I found a satellite,
I'm sorry.
and I
iPhone
could
has a
text.
satellite service?
Yeah, I
Is
think it's 14 Pro and above, maybe. Um,
crazy.
but I got tricked by the marketing, and I got the 16 Pro because of
I'm still on the
Apple.
13, so it's time for me to upgrade. So
There
I'll
you go,
be,
and
yeah.
you can get satellite, and yeah,
Crazy. I didn't know that.
yeah, you do satellite, and it tells you to move this direction. You move, and then you point at a satellite, and it gets your connection. And
Bonkers.
you can text.
Living in the future.
It's amazing. It really is. So, so back to the back. So yeah, so that was the consensus. Okay, we just need to establish, okay, who has generators, and if we don't have proper coverage, let's invest in generators. Maybe we keep them at the company, so that we can maintain them. We say, okay, hey, we're going to hurricane. We know there's one coming. Let's distribute to key people who we need to be
Right.
up, and then there are point people along with anyone who's outside of any danger zone.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's really very deep, holistic thinking to consider disaster recovery from that standpoint.
And we never had until we had to, or now we had to because, or we had an opportunity to, I should say, because we had we had a direct. I mean, it was a direct hit. It made landfall in the Sarasota area where we are located.
Yeah, that's scary stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Disaster.
anyways, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, disaster recovery falls under the umbrella, in my, from my perspective, as the thing that very accomplished companies do. Meaning that there are a lot of things that are ideal. You know, best case scenario, we have things like this in place. But I've always thought of disaster recovery, any kind of comprehensive disaster recovery, as being like, you must be at least this tall to have this kind of a strategy in place. Because it's not inexpensive to have
No.
full disaster recovery plans. I mean, people talk about, oh yeah, if we're in US East Amazon, then we just have to have a like complete replica of our data and some standby applications running in US West so that we can fail over to them. I'm like, aren't you basically doubling the cost of
Yeah.
all of your hosting to have something like that in place?
Well, so being in that world, we talk to people about two levels of DR. One of which is the always on. So and that's basically you're doing full replicas, and there's some syncing nonstop between the two, and that can get expensive because you do have to have two always on systems.
Yeah.
The other solution is just to have incremental backups. Let's say
Right.
every hour, wherever your tolerance for losses, to say, hey, look, okay, we're okay if we lose an hour of business, we can redo that. So then you just take backups and you say, okay, not only are we okay losing that hour, but we're okay if the disaster really strikes, then it's okay if it'll be a few hours for us to get back. So as long as that backup's not locally located where the server is, that's
Yeah.
a really bad plan. As long as it's somewhere else, then you can just restore that in some environment. So with multiple data centers, that's what we set up for people who need that, is that we'll have backups at a different data center. And then we just tell them, hey, look, we'll just spin up your VPS. If a disaster, if let's say some craziness earthquake hits our Virginia facility, then hey, here's your DR plan, because some companies need that, even though it's never happened before, where it's done anything, but they still want to see that and they need that. And so that's what we do.
So from an xByte standpoint, there's, when they talk about the nines of uptime, 4 nines, 5 nines, and so on, they talk about every 9 is actually a very large incremental cost. So presumably, if someone needed 6 nines of reliability, you'd be like, all right, now we have to get out our purchase orders, and this is going to be like a many zeros check. But if someone just needs, whatever the reasonable amount of uptime is there a baseline that xByte just does for everybody, almost because the infrastructure demands it? Like if someone just needs, like if I get a managed database and a VPS, is that database and VPS being backed up incrementally just as a baseline, or is that also something? Okay.
Correct. We provide a baseline. Hey, for every VPS we do so much backup, and we give the option of adding to that, but we do a certain amount that's for free. That's for restoring, not from a DR perspective. So if some earthquake were to hit Virginia and you were located in Virginia and Virginia was down, then you would technically be down also. There's
down, but data loss, or
no, we still be able to recover that data.
Okay.
But let's just say the infrastructure was broken in networking, or the network infrastructure was down, so we couldn't get access to it.
They're digging and they accidentally sever the wire coming out of the data source. Yeah.
So we're backed up as far as that goes. But it wouldn't be where we could just, without you investing in it, we're not going to be taking your data, making it easily restorable offsite somewhere.
Yeah, that makes sense. They always say that hope shouldn't be a plan, or hope is not a plan, and that you always have to test your disaster recoveries. That basically, unless you've tested it, it doesn't work. And I've definitely I've been in the hope camp my whole career. We've never really had to test, or at least I've never had to test a disaster recovery plan. So I hope that everything that we have in place works, and I hope that where I host some of my stuff is working. But I imagine you guys are testing that stuff on an ongoing basis. Yeah, that's got to be pretty complicated.
And for customers testing it. And we're constantly looking at anything. So even if a customer were to do something on their own that leaves a backdoor for somebody to get, like a hacker to get into their network, then we have procedures in place for what we do to say, okay, there shouldn't be a way that they can get access to anything. But let's say there's a 0 day in our hypervisor that we didn't know about that they can then exploit. Well, we want to make sure we've done all of our due diligence in analyzing our entire infrastructure after any customer gets hit. And so we have all those plans in place. That's kind of like a mini DR in the hosting world, is somebody gets hacked in some fashion.
Oof. It's a terrifying thought. Presumably, if a company has to get some sort of a SOC compliance certification, the hosting provider, is there like a security checklist that you provide to other companies to say, we've hardened our network to this extent, just so that people can check boxes to say that we've looked into this kind of stuff?
Yeah, and there's a SOC 2 Type 2 that our data center has been certified.
Gotcha.
So that checks off a lot of people. So from that infrastructure, and then there's also like credit card, PCI DSS certifications that people go through, and then we'll help them with the infrastructure side, or the infrastructure questions on that.
Yeah, the PCI stuff sounds just like a world you don't want to be in. I'm so happy. We've used various vendors over the years, Recurly, Zora, Stripe, and it's just so nice to just get a token and be able to pass a token along and say, this is the account, charge them this amount of money, and just sidestep all of the headache. Because you have to ensure that you have actual physical security in your
Oh yeah.
processing facilities and stuff. I mean, it's such a higher level of standard that you have to live up to.
Yeah, when they came out with the tokenization of credit cards, it was way so much smarter. So glad that happened.
It's so fascinating, some of the implementations. So I had implemented, when we used Recurly, which is just a vendor, I had implemented the way we integrated into the app, and every field in the payment form, like the name and the credit card number and the billing address, there were actual iframes. Each individual field was an iframe, and so it creates the kind of security sandbox. So there you're loading the
Oh
credit
wow.
card field from Recurly so that it's actually in a different domain,
Yeah.
so that even if your parent page was compromised, it still, for the browser security standpoint, you wouldn't have access to get into the iframe in which the person is typing the credit card. I mean, it's just really
Huh.
fascinating
Wow.
stuff at the implementation
That's really
level.
smart.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pain. Sometimes it's a pain to actually then integrate that stuff easily, but it's obviously worth it because people's credit card information is pretty sensitive.
Yeah. And then some designers mad because they can't control the look of that.
Yeah, right.
They put
It's
form, like,
the line height on this input field is inappropriate.
Like it's an iframe. Sorry. Take it up
Oh,
with them. All right. So I threw mine out there. So Ben, what are you thinking about? What's on your mind this week?
sure. So along the same lines of the managed hosting, let's just keep going in this direction. I
I
was
could talk about
watching.
it all day.
That's right. Let's do this. I was watching a keynote. I think it's from Rails World 2024. I think this just happened. I listened to a bunch of Ruby on Rails podcasts, and
Why?
it's interesting just to get different perspectives from everybody. So I listened to Golang podcasts. I listened to Ruby on Rails podcasts. I listened to some PHP podcasts. I mean, I don't understand half of what is being said because they're talking about very low level technical things sometimes. Like if I listen to .NET Rocks, for example, they'll talk about a .NET library that means nothing to me, but they'll touch on topics in a high level way that I can connect with. I just like to get outside my bubble sometimes. We all exist in these little technology
Is
bubbles.
Ruby still popular? I know I'm not a hardcore or even light core developer.
So
I can, but is it as popular as it was at one point?
it seems to be having a bit of a resurgence. It was
Oh,
super popular in the early 2000s. I've never been a Ruby programmer, so this is all someone looking from the outside. It seemed to be super popular, and then it kind of started to trail off, or at least people weren't talking about it as much.
yeah.
But in the last couple of years, I've been seeing it start to now come back into the zeitgeist and people getting very excited about things within the Ruby world. Ruby on Rails has been having regular updates. They've also been releasing their front end frameworks, Hotwire, which has Turbo and Stimulus. So there's been just, I think, maybe more movement and a re-energization of the Ruby community. But I mean, I watch these keynotes and they're packed just like you would have at any mainstream technology conference. So
No.
so anyway, getting
Yeah.
back to the keynote there for a second. So DHH, David Hannemeier Hansen, who is the creator of Ruby on Rails, co-founder of Basecamp, was talking about how as hardware evolves, you also have to reconsider how you think about the hardware limitations. And he talked specifically about how old spinning hard drives used to be considerably slower than the solid state drives that we have today, which when you embrace that, when you lean into that evolution, you can start to think about using the SSD drives as caches. So maybe things like Redis or I know there's a bunch of kind of reverse proxies that do caching. Maybe you can eliminate some of the complexity in your application architecture. Instead of calling out to another service, you can just use your hard drive as the cache. And they're so fast now that it's basically, you don't suffer the file IO input output overhead. And this got me thinking about managed hosting because you have customers that maybe signed up for the first time today, and you have customers that signed up for the first time 5, 10, 15 years ago. And in 15 years, the hardware advances are probably quite significant. Just I think about the amount of RAM you could get with a server. If you had 4 GB of RAM 15 years ago, it's like, oh, it's pretty amazing. And now you can get a database with a terabyte of RAM, and it's like, oh yeah, that's not a problem. It's just expensive.
Yeah.
So I didn't know, how does a managed hosting company approach improvements in hardware? Can someone who's been on xByte Cloud for a couple of years, can they say, hey, my machine's feeling a little old, can we just upgrade my machine, and give me the latest stuff? Or is it just something that happens behind the scenes under the hypervisors, and customers don't really get to think about that stuff? How does the evolution of a managed hosting platform actually work?
Yeah. So from our side, because we started with very high-end infrastructure,
You dropped in from the top.
then our customers really aren't going to be complaining for a very long time. So I can speak in theory to what someone you do, but yeah, on our side, I mean, we're using NVMe SSDs, which is the next iteration of SSDs, which are more performant than your standard SSDs.
Interesting.
So that's just the benefit, because we have a parent company who sells hardware. We basically get it close to cost, from what a distributor may pay for it, or actually probably less than most distributors pay for it. We have that advantage, and so we got our pick of technology, and they're able to help say, hey, look, we just got a great deal on this stuff. Why don't you use this stuff in your servers? And we're able to kind of create clusters of that. And we knew that they'd have this. We also made sure that they had a recurring amount of that, so that as we added new servers to the cluster, we could also get the same infrastructure, or close to it. I mean, and so that kind of answers your question. So if, for our customers at least, they're not going to, again, it's gonna be a long time. Let's say it's 10 years from now, someone's like, hey, look, my server is feeling a little sluggish. What can we do? It kind of depends on what direction the hosting provider takes. And I don't know what direction we may go in the future, but we could say, hey, we're going to create a new cluster that is more performant. And that may be at a certain amount. So you pay a certain amount for and if you go to like an Azure or an AWS, you're going to see that, where you're going to have different layers. I think they have spinning and SSD are your two options.
Well, can I jump in and ask a clarifying question? Because I'm not a server guy, and I'm certainly not a virtual server person. Like, I don't understand how the virtualization works really in any way whatsoever. When I recently learned that in cloud database solutions, they actually separate the storage of the database from the actual compute power. I didn't even know that things like that were possible. When it comes to virtualized servers, except in cases where people have what do they call, like raw metal or whatever, the
bare metal
server, the bare metal, their server. In a virtualized environment, if I can remote into my desktop and I see the operating system and I see the C drive and I can click into it and I can see how much storage I have available. Is that storage actually tied to the machine that I'm on, or is there a separation between where files are actually going and like what the virtualized experience is? I'm not asking that in the most accurate way, but
it depends on the implementation. Most of the time, your files may be anywhere. It's going to kind of put it where it wants to, and it creates the virtual volumes to allow for that to happen. You can set up where certain pieces are on certain servers. So you could say, hey, look, this customer is going to be on this infrastructure. So that's a potential. Those are kind of the things that you can do. If let's say a vendor's decided, hey, we're going to roll out new infrastructure, one new server in the cluster at a time, you may have certain applications that work faster because they happen to be on the newer stuff. And then you may see a slowdown because, hey, it's on having to be on older equipment today. It's probably not going to bounce day to day, but
of course,
you may have certain things that all of a sudden you get a boost and you're like, oh, how do I get that boost back? It's like, oh, it's because we have some super fast and we have some a little slightly less than super fast. And that may be why companies decide to go for two different clusters, so that people don't see that any change in performance.
That makes sense. If you consider the various aspects of the hardware platform, the CPUs, the GPUs, the RAM chips, the drives, the network switches. What evolves at the fastest rate? Like what could theoretically be updated most often? Or is it things don't evolve and then there's huge step changes that
So on the evolution of servers in general, the CPU goes through some of the biggest changes more frequently.
gotcha.
Your memory is going to have some incremental changes as the instruction sets with the CPU evolve. There may be something that they do that they can now operate a little bit faster, but it's going to be small amounts.
Mm-hmm.
In CPUs, or sorry, in memory and hard drives, it's much more of a capacity increase. So you're going to see like the differences between years, not necessarily on performance. There could be some big jumps in performance, like when SSDs came out, or NVMe SSDs when they came out. Then you also have there's just pure memory based storage as well. So it kind of sits just how memory is, and it's on the bus just where memory is. So it's really, really fast, but it's also very, very expensive. So those don't happen very often as much as you see CPU advances. So you'll hear people talking about like Crystal Lake or whatever the code name is for each Intel or AMD's set of CPUs. And there'll always be some advancement if it's more cores all of a sudden because the density they've gotten or some new technology. Or again, the instruction sets, they may add specialized instructions or they work better with GPUs or something, or they work with the hardware vendors to have some advancement. You'll see that on the CPUs.
The core, the whole world of cores seems to have passed me by. I think the last time I learned about CPUs and the number of cores, it was like chips had like 4 cores or something. And the other day, I think I heard someone talk about a chip that had like 128 cores on it. It's a whole different world now.
Yeah, from a server world, we see AMD pushing the core limit. There are different CPU benchmarking sites that you can go out there and take a look at things. That's what we look at more than just the number of cores and what type of processing you're going to be having it do, because there can be some applications that happen to perform better on a certain chip. Generally, their businesses don't see that, so you're going to get more specialized. If someone's doing a special thing, then we may look at some benchmarking on their particular application to see which one performs better.
So I just completed a course last week. It was a video course by this guy, Aaron Francis. He had a SQL. It was like a high performance SQLite. It was a video course about the SQLite database. And in the course, he had a phrase that I absolutely loved. And it was, I think, all benchmarks are lies, but some of them are helpful. And I thought that was really good, like framing it that this is not reality, but if you're looking at something specific, this can be helpful.
Yeah. Very true. And I think it's relative. So it's like, oh, okay,
right, exactly.
This one performs a little bit better, okay. And this specific, and it'd be funny if you're a particular chip maker, you may pick one person because their benchmark makes you look better.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, all advertising skewed. It's funny being in marketing. You're like you look at the stuff and you're like, yeah, I know how you're doing your especially people who cite data. You're like, okay, there were 8 studies in front of you, all doing relatively close to the same thing, but one of them had your outcome, so you picked that one to talk about.
Right, exactly. It's like growing up, I had always learned about the scientific process as you form a hypothesis and then you test that hypothesis. And what I have come to learn from listening to the Freakonomics podcast is that's, at least in the economics world, that's not really how science happens, that you look at the data and you find something in the data that looks like it might indicate something, and then you create a hypothesis based on that data, and then you go back and test the hypothesis against the data. So you're sort of working backwards and then forwards, as opposed to just trying to come up with random hypotheses. Anyway, that's a total aside there.
I mean, it is much better. It's much easier to prove your hypothesis when it's derived from the data.
Yeah, exactly.
We're right.
So when something that is when there's an issue issue is not the right word. I don't know, I'm talking a little bit above my pay grade here, but when something like Heartbleed comes out, which was, if I understood it correctly, was a vulnerability kind of at the way the
Yeah.
CPU processed certain commands in a platform world. Is that something that affects you guys, or is that something that applications built on top of the platform have to worry about?
Heartbleed was a long time ago now.
Yeah.
Um,
We don't have to go into that. We can cut this
yeah,
out.
I'm trying to think back of what we did for, because it was so specialized, if I recall correctly, that I believe it was like, I think it was Dell who ended up releasing for us. We do a lot of Dell, and I think they released some sort of a firmware that helped protect you, or
Gotcha.
something. They worked with Intel on how to protect um, from that. But again, it was something that I believe you may have even needed to have physical access to the box.
Oh, crazy.
Some of these are like that. It's
Wait,
like, hey,
are you
if you
telling me
do
that
all these
serverless
things,
has servers?
yeah, exactly. Like, oh, it's in the cloud. Okay, it's not on a server; it's in the cloud. I'm like, really? The clouds just rain on you.
Yeah.
There's no cloud. Cloud's a server in someone else's data center.
All right, that's good. I think I've exhausted all of my platforming questions. It's just such a different world, you
Yeah.
know. It's also okay. I'll go into one other thing here then. Like I was saying earlier, we get into our bubbles. This is why I'll try to listen to some Ruby on Rails and some PHP podcasts, just to kind of expand my mind of what is available, even if it's not something that I'm taking advantage of. In my particular bubble, it's very much a Docker based, Kubernetes based image deployments where we're taking machines down with old code and then we're spinning new machines up that have the new code. So you live in this sort of immutable world where you're constantly replacing infrastructure as opposed to updating it. I mean, whatever happens underneath the hood from a
Yeah.
platform level, that's a different question. But I know that xByte deals with a lot of VPSs, virtual private servers. Presumably, you have a lot of customers that are not necessarily doing, Kubernetes or Docker Swarm type deployments. In a world like that, do you have a sense of how customers are actually moving code from their development environments into their managed hosting environments?
So a lot of times it's on they may have it within this. They may have one VPS, which is dev, but most of the time it's going to be where it's all in the same box, where they just have a particular. They just have their one website, which is dev, and they have code there, and it's just being deployed on that server. They may have some local. I can always ask her.
In a single VPS scenario where you have a dev.mysite.com and a www.mysite.com, there's a world where you're doing development in the one site, and let's just, to make it very tangible, you have one IIS site that is your dev site, and you have one IIS site. IIS, for listeners, being the Internet Information Services. It's the hosting.
Yes. Yep.
It's the web publishing service on the Windows server. My understanding. When they're ready to deploy, are they just literally moving files from the dev folder into the production folder, or are they like?
That's a great question. I'm not 100% sure on that.
I know this is not what you do on a day-to-day basis, but I was just curious.
They may have automated procedures to do some of that, depending on what platforms, like the Git or something, they're using to kind of control that.
So back in the day when we were on, when we first started at Envision, we were on hostmysite.com, I think it was called.
Yeah, what did you guys do?
So when we had our first server, when we had just one server and everything ran on the one server, people would message me over Skype, just to give you a time frame here on technologies, and they'd say, "Hey Ben, I have to deploy," and they would tell me that they've pushed the code to GitHub. And I would literally remote into the one server that we had in production, and I would use Tortoise VPN or something. I don't know. Like there was a tool I could go in, and I would go into the production directory, and I would just right click and I'd pull down from GitHub. So I basically do a live update from GitHub into the production folder, and then we had a URL that we had to hit that would essentially refresh all the in-memory caches. So if you think about Cold Fusion, it's a running memory space. And if you have new code, you have to flush the old memory space and pull in the new memory space. And we had a URL that would do that. So that's when we had a single server. As we needed to start to load balance, what we did was not that different. At some point, we had like 13 Cold Fusion servers running. And I think the way it worked was I still had to remote, when someone had to deploy, I still had to remote into the machine. And I did the same kind of a git pull to, we had a primary machine that act as the source for all that stuff. And then the hosting company had set up, I think it was called rsync. And it was some sort of syncing service where they basically said, look at this directory, and anytime any file in this directory changes, sync it to the 12 replica servers, essentially. But the crazy part is, so we were still living in this world where I had to hit a URL to trigger the flushing of the in-memory caches. So every time we did a deployment, I'd have to wait. I mean, it was instantaneous basically to sync across the servers, but I had to wait for all the files to sync to the other servers. And then I had a set of bookmarks in my browser that would use a special URL flag to, it was an F5 load balancer. I think that's a thing. I'm not exactly sure. And there was something that you could give it the server name in the URL, and it would make sure to route to that particular server. So every time we did a deployment, I would have to just do like right click, open all and new tabs, and it would reinitialize all 13 servers using this URL flag. I mean, it worked. It worked really well.
I would hope that technology's changed.
Yeah. So, but I don't know what people do now. It's
that's a great. You know what? I will. What do the kids say? I'll put a pin in that now. And I will. I'm realizing as the sun comes to my left side, I have the shade down, but it's like glowing on my side of my face. There you go. I need like warming light so I look tan. I'm looking very pale. But I will put a pin in that. Actually, I'll chat with Dakota and either bring him on one day or come up with that information, because I mean his team handles all that infrastructure for us and for the customers doing load balancing, even the geo load balancing between locations. There has to be some kind of way that they're syncing files that is nice and easy, because no one really wants to do. I mean, everyone's coming to us for nice and easy. They're not coming to us for I've got to do a bunch of clicks to make stuff work. So I'm sure he's been involved in that. And also we also deal with customers who do have the Kubernetes world. I mean, in our world, load balancing, so couple steps back on load balancing and how all that can work in infrastructure on our side of things. The piece that at least we don't do within our own private cloud is the auto scaling. So for people who need auto scaling, where hey, look, it's under load, we need to add new servers to the cluster in order to build a load balance more of that load. That's where we would manage somebody, and we do this. We manage AWS and Azure environments because they need something like that, where they're going to either have the web or the SQL or some combination of both.
You're in a world in some fashion. You have to have a representation of the server in like an immutable state, so that you can just stamp out copies of it at that point.
Exactly, and auto, and so not necessarily just stamping out, but auto scaling that. In the VPS world, because I mean it's an image, basically it's a VM image. We can stamp out, but it's just that we're not set up to automatically do that based on demand. It'd be something where we say, hey, we now carve out new resources. We drop your copy in there, turn it back on. It's not the longest process out there, but it's not the auto scaling. And so that it's funny. I actually was mistaken with this. I'm newish to the hosting world, been involved with xByte Cloud for the past year and a half, but came from a big hardware background before that. So I asked the question to people, hey, of course, if you need kind of new, like spun up VPSs, you wouldn't use us, you'd use AWS. And then I was corrected saying, hey, no, it's the auto scaling piece, which is why you go to those vendors, not necessarily just needing a copy of the VPS. And so in our world, you got a new VPS for any kind of load balancing, and that's exactly what we do. Is we set up a new VPS.
Right. It just has to be planned more explicitly. Like,
correct.
If you were running a some sort of a sports related company, and you're like, oh, the Super Bowl is 2 Sundays from now, can we spin up 10 new VPSs to handle whatever Super Bowl specific load we might need? We'll have them out there for a couple of weeks and then we'll spin them back down. Like, the people would have to just put it in order and make sure they do it in enough time.
Yeah, and we do that for customers who they have.
Sure.
I'm trying to think of which ones I can talk about, but there are people who have basically do some kind of events.
Yeah,
is that basically all I can really get into on this one. They do certain events, and during those times they need more capacity, and so we plan for that with them, so that their events they're more leveraged from a load balance perspective than other times, and we'll just turn them off when they're not using them.
This was a couple of years ago, so I'm probably misremembering some of the details here, but I went to a Datadog, had a conference in New York City. I think it was called Dash. And I went to a presentation, and I want to say it was DraftKings, the online, online betting site. And I think they said that they had to pre-allocate their Super Bowl around Super Bowl. They got such a spike in traffic, and it was so fast and so extreme that they couldn't even depend on automated horizontal scaling like you were talking about earlier. They literally had to like double their capacity or triple their capacity days ahead of time, because the scalers just wouldn't even handle the spike in traffic so quickly. And things spin up so fast, like minutes on some of these servers, and even that was it would cripple their service, because it was that was too slow. So they really had to plan ahead of time, which is fascinating. You think you have one solution should just work in all cases. And there are just these weird, very prickly edge cases that it still doesn't make sense to have certain types of solutions.
Yeah, it's like when people looked at serverless and then they're like, oh, maybe monolith is better for this particular application.
I'm very pro monolith. I do love me a monolith. It's so fascinating to me, right? Because so I talked about the Aaron Francis had the quote that all what was the all benchmarks are lies, but some of them are helpful. I also love there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And to me, that's very much how I look at serverless, that it's just a different set of trade-offs. It's not inherently better or worse, because you hear people talk about these issues where they're like, oh, I'll just spin up a Lambda function and I can put all my logic there and it's not a problem. And then all of a sudden they get a spike, and now instead of 15 Lambda functions running, they have 3,000 Lambda functions running, and suddenly they have 3,000 connections to their database, and then the database can't handle that. They're like, oh, well, it's no problem, because then you can limit the number of concurrent Lambda functions that are running, or you can put in some sort of an intermediary. It's like a database connection pool. So you're not actually connecting to the database itself. You're connecting to this intermediary, and it's managing the connections. And you're like, yeah, that sounds way more complicated. So, not to say that that's wrong, just that you're inviting a different set of problems.
Yeah. Anyway, so as long as what you're solving is more than you're causing, then you're good.
Right. As long as you're making your life easier, then you're doing the right thing. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. But I forget what we were even talking about.
I have no idea.
Deployments.
I have no idea. The really audience, I mean, you've got to love tangents and to be listening to this, because we just kind of
it's tangents all the way down.
Yeah.
So it would be great to get Dakota. Is that who you said? Yeah, I'd be so curious to say it again.
Yeah, he's our CTO.
Oh,
so he oversees. Yeah, he oversees all that stuff.
Yeah, I'd be super curious, because again, we live in these bubbles where you could talk to someone, and if you're not using GitHub Actions to build images and then deploy them to Docker Hub and then pulling down, whatever, you're like, oh, are you living in the Stone Age? But like, that's a very specific type of workflow for a very specific type of context. And I think it's very helpful for people to get outside the bubble and understand that that's one set of constraints. It's not all sets of constraints. And it would be, I think, very enlightening to know how other people work.
It's a good one. We'll definitely invite him on.
Noise. We'll put a pin in that.
We'll put a pin in it. We'll and when he's here, we'll double click it.
We'll double click. It's so funny when you double click is obviously much more common in the technology world, and it's funny to listen to a technologist get interviewed on kind of a civilian podcast or and they use double click, and it just feels so out of place sometimes.
We're like, gonna do what? No. I'm actually gonna middle click on that one. Like, can we open that in a new tab? That's like put a pin in it. We're gonna middle click that one.
Yeah.
We're starting that. We're starting the trend.
There you
middle
go.
clicking means
you heard it here first.
We're gonna new tab that one. We're gonna take it later. I think middle click's new tab, right? Hopefully not.
I have no idea.
No one. That's people are our fan base is going to be destroying us on social for misusing middle click.
Oh man! All right, groovy. What else?
I'm trying to think. We did such a large amount of planning ahead of time before the show.
I was curious to know more about, just from a marketing standpoint. I've seen on LinkedIn you put up this video in the full recording, and then you create these sort of short teaser. I don't know if teaser is the right word, but little clips of interesting moments in the podcast. And I don't know. I think I would just kind of like to, if you could double click on that for a second.
Sure.
What, from a marketer's standpoint, how do you think about content generation? And if I could tee it up for a second, I think a lot of people, or maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but a lot of people, there's a lot of insecurity that you don't want to put yourself out there too much, because you're the center of your own universe. So you just kind of assume that everyone is watching everything you do. This is like child development 101. But the reality is, you're a drop in the bucket for what people's daily lives are actually like. So how do you approach that as a marketer?
So it's interesting from a marketing perspective, not only with content creation, but even email marketing. From a technology standpoint, at least, working with xByte Technologies our sister company Technologies for the years, from an email perspective, we found that it wasn't necessarily the fact that the content in an email was persuasive or something like that, but it just kept our name out in front of people.
Yeah.
And so we could repeat the same message because they're not really reading it. I mean, sorry, marketers, they're not really reading the messages. But it just reminded them, and so that if they're thinking, hey, I need to buy something, and they see our email about something else, our most clicked on links had nothing to do with the content. They were like our general rack servers. People are like, oh yeah, I need a rack server. Let me click on rack servers. It has nothing to do with the content. So even if the content was compelling, those would get some clicks, but it was really just the generic links that people clicked on from an email marketing, at least for us.
I'll tell you, that lines up very much. So in our first episode, we talked about CF Summit and which presentations we enjoyed. One of the presentations that I rather enjoyed was Nolan Irk talked about freelancing as a programmer. And one of the strategies that he uses, and Nolan, sorry if I'm giving away proprietary information here, but he gave it in a presentation.
I know.
He makes every Christmas, he makes a mix CD, because he's a huge music buff. I think he said he spends more on going to concerts in a year than most people spend in a whole lifetime. Loves music, and he likes to share and educate people about the music world. So he makes a mix CD, like an actual physical CD. And for our younger listeners, that's like a disc you used to be able to put into a machine to play music. And he sends them out to his clients. And exactly what you're saying, he says, no one listens to the CD because no one has a CD player anymore. He said, but what happens is 2 years go by, and then the client needs something on the web. They need something created, and they look over and they see this CD, and they're like, oh, right, Nolan, he makes websites. Let me contact him. And they'd be like, hey, you're the website guy. You sent me a CD a couple of years ago. So yeah, it's just
Yep.
being in the front of people's mind, or at least in the periphery, is more powerful almost than the content itself.
From a B2B perspective, I'd say yes on that. Now, if someone's out there doing B2C marketing, a lot of times you're going to do those impulse buys where they are going to, it is the content is going to be need to be better on those. It's not just staying in front of them.
Right. This is like the xByte is having a fire sale this weekend. Sign up in the next 24 hours and you get 30% off your activation fee, like that kind of a thing.
Yeah, we probably still wouldn't get people to move because here's the interesting.
Well, it's a big lift. It's a big lift in this world. Yeah,
it is. It's moving providers and everything, but it's what I was going to say though is that actually, what was I going to say? That in a B2B world, it's not generally that person's money they're spending. Right. So if you save them a few dollars, they're like, I don't get a raise if I save my company a few dollars. But you know what? If I can do more for the company, I may get one. So if you can take some of my pain away or provide me more services and my company will pay for it, then I'm gonna do that thing. And so those fire sales don't necessarily work unless you have a large list of business owners. Then it may sense. And have these smaller companies that they would care that much about a certain discount. But going back to your original question about the content, similar with emails though, on your LinkedIn or any social platform out there, people are clicking through so much. Even if they did get exposed to it the first time, they may not have clicked into it or even stopped or paused. So putting it out there multiple times, and then even the messaging around it. So the reason for that, and I'm giving away somewhere not really your secrets because I stole them from somebody else. But there's a different audience for each of each type of content. So we do this on a platform. We do video. People may want to watch the video, but we've all started doing it. We turned into a podcast for Spotify and Apple Music because my first idea for these was because I would listen to them, but I needed a platform. I didn't know how to do podcasting at the time, so we did it on YouTube, and then I figured out how to get those syndicated out there to those different platforms. So now people can listen to them. Because a lot of times this would be something where you plug it into the background as you're driving into work.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So if like right here, it's washing my face out with the light coming in from the side, then it's okay because hopefully you're listening to it on Spotify or Apple Music. But from the video content, we then say, okay, hey, we have this longer form. What else can we do with that? Because it's silly to just take that and just be like, okay, we're gonna do a bunch of long form forever. Because people, as they're on YouTube, they see it. I mean, we're hitting right now. I can see the counter at like 53 minutes. So we'll probably go right around an hour, past an hour today. So if people are looking at YouTube and they see an hour long, that's a big commitment.
Yeah. The youths are like 6 seconds is what I got.
Yeah. So unless you really know us and you really like, oh, I got these guys. So I think once you get an audience, you may get people to sit around for an hour, but on a video, it's hard to do. So what we said is like, hey, look, we're going to make that. We're going to do two things to that. First of all, we're going to make it into smaller segments, and and we're just starting to do more of this. And so you'll see this with all the different podcasts that I'm a part of, or the xByte's a part of, where we turn them into more like a 3 to let's say 8 minute segment. So it's about a topic that was discussed.
A little more digestible.
Easily digestible. So you say 3 minutes, you're like, okay, I can watch, or 5 minutes, I can watch that. And it's a specific topic. So it's like, yes, I'm interested in that topic. Like today, we've gone off on a bunch of different things, and you may not get that when you read a description of the full hour-long episode.
Ben and Ryan ramble on about a variety of topics.
So if we have one and you see the title, like, okay, yeah, I'm interested in this, so let me go ahead. And what I'm doing with those is I'm saying, hey, I take the big one, cut it into little micro clips or shorter segments, and then I record a separate intro to just that clip. because going right into the clip, people don't necessarily have the context around what's going on. So I'll introduce it.
Right.
I'll say something like, "Hey, in this clip, Ben raises a question about has Justin ever seen people escape from prison or from last one has Justin ever heard about people being paid to escape from prisons like Sylvester Stallone?" And
There
so
you go. Call back.
I'll set up the video, or we talk about session management, or we say, "Hey, should you really roll your own authentication?" And Ben and Justin talk about what their experiences are doing authentication, and so that helps people in the first few seconds understand what the video is about, and then it goes into the excerpt, and then they can say, "Oh yeah, here's them talking about this topic."
Yeah,
So
I love the idea of the little clips, because I've always wanted to do that, and I've never motivated to do it. But it is, as a consumer of content, I have to be in a special mindset to want to listen to an entire episode of something. But if I'm just scrolling, yeah, I want something short and to the point.
yeah, and then so that's one form of shortened, and then we shorten beyond that. So those are like 3 to 5 minute long segments, and then we have another version which are for the more horizontal, like your phone scrolling.
Yeah.
So for like your YouTube Reels, or no, it's a Facebook, YouTube Shorts.
Yeah, Facebook has Reels, YouTube has Shorts. Yeah.
So for any of those, or TikTok, those phone style formats, those can only be, I think, up to a minute. And we really have to do better at those. And so we actually use AI to generate those. So yeah. So for the minute long ones, we send it to an AI processor. It processes them and it spits out particular potential segments. And they give you editing software, and you can do all the little subtitles that pop up there and stuff like that. They have all that. I
saw that with the different color coding and everything, and following the word. It's very cool.
Yeah. So that's AI driven. You can edit them in case they miss a word or something like that. You can also do B-roll. So if you wanted to do like just the person talking for 10 seconds and B-roll for a second and come back, you can do those kind of post-production items into that, and to make those more interesting from just that the first few seconds of that. So like I think you saw one we did where it was just you talking about being a weirdo, going to conferences and being a weirdo from our first episode. That was one where the AI looked at that, and it's hard a lot of times to get it down to that under a minute, because you can't submit it. It won't be accepted as the phone style short format. It's longer than that by even a millisecond.
Oh, that's funny.
So you've got to adjust down. You got to take out pauses, or I say, "Hey, look, this word or this, where can we cut it down to get it to that length, so it'll be accepted as a short." And so that's some of the fun of doing those. It's a lot of fun though. It's interesting to kind of relive some of it, and you're like, okay, hey, what matters to a consumer out there?
Yeah. Well, it's fun, but it's also terribly important. If I've learned anything, both from experience and from listening to other people recount their lessons learned in life, marketing is not just so important, it's almost the important thing. That the product you create is you can create the best product in the world, and if it's not marketed well, it just doesn't matter. And you could see subpar products winning in different marketplaces simply because they have the best marketing. And I as the solo engineer in my own personal life, it's very tempting is not the right word. It would be lovely if building something helpful was actually the biggest step forward. But the reality is, as an individual, it's like you really need that team behind you, not just to build, but also to share the message, to sell it in the street, to spread the word. And without that, I mean, that is a necessary step for success. So I appreciate you going above and beyond and getting those little things done. It's really amazing.
Yeah, it's from a contribution to the development and specifically the Cold Fusion community. It's awesome that xByte Cloud has allotted me the time to devote that much of my schedule to be able to oversee and personally create some. I personally create some and oversee the creation of other pieces of that. But to build a kind of, because it does take, I say AI, but that gets you started.
Right.
Just like
AI augmented, it's still human in the loop.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
It does it, and then you take it and you're like, oh, you know what? No, I need different clips in there, so you can change it up so it grabs different areas of the video. So I mean, just like ChatGPT, you're not going to take whatever it spits out as the Bible or whatever you happen to have as your definitive source of something. If you don't believe teach their own on stuff, but if whatever your definitive source is, if ChatGPT, we kind of got all religious all of a sudden. But yeah, so you're not going to take that and just kind of regurgitate it. You're going to kind of nudge it a little bit and make it better. So yeah, but yeah, it's fun. I mean, I love. I mean, I can't believe you're an introvert and you're getting out and doing a podcast, and I guess you're not actually
from the safety of my own home. Yeah, I'm not wearing shoes. I'm not wearing socks. You know, as far as you know, I have pants on.
You can stop at the ankle.
So yeah, it's I mean, I love talking about this stuff. I'm genuinely very curious about all the platform stuff. I mean, everything I talk about, I have a genuine curiosity, and so I love getting other people's perspective. I mean, that's what's so thrilling about doing stuff like this, is not just your perspective, but then anyone else who wants to comment in or correct or add color to the things that we talk about. It's all learning for me. So it's as much as it's tangents all the way down, it's wins all the way down as well.
Well, we do and we're doing a good mix. So
yeah.
Well, and today was just tangent. I mean, today was just we wanted to have some fun and do some recording. But it'll be interesting to see where the Ben and Ryan show goes.
Indeed.
As we bounce having guests on. It was great having Justin on last week. I got to hit up Charvy to see when we're doing that. I know they're launching beta of 2025 here shortly. So that'd be a good time to kind of talk about that. Get her insights into that, and then to ask her all the questions Justin gave us about
what's the ramp up time. What's the ramp up time? So Adobe releases at some point Cold Fusion 2025. What is the lag time to when someone can go to xByte and say, hey, I want to upgrade to 2025?
I would be right then. And we're
you're just ready to go.
Yeah, we're ready to go. And we're even, so one of the things that's big, it's very important for us.
Yeah.
And I apologize for anyone who this is not a planned xByte cloud commercial.
No. This is all fascinating stuff. This is information that people in the Cold Fusion world should be knowing.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure other providers do this too, but for us, the security of the application is very important.
Sure.
And I don't want to knock other providers to have them say it doesn't, but just for us, it's very important. And in order to provide the safest environment for our customers, we encourage them all to upgrade. And I believe shortly we're going to have, I believe the stats I saw, we have one more round of updates. So we work with different blocks of customers depending on their schedules for upgrades. And our last block is about ready to be finished for the last
2023.
Not 2023, but the last update of 2023.
Okay, gotcha.
So Adobe has been doing a crazy update schedule.
So many updates.
Yeah. So the very most recent
like
one,
17 or something.
Yeah, we're gonna have a 90% adoption rate on the most recent update of Cold Fusion.
That's awesome.
I mean, I think that's higher than iPhone than Apple has. And so our customers, we're reminding them, I mean, to say, hey, look, you're here, you need to be here, because and we've done videos with Charlie, and we've done our own videos to help educate people about the differences and what they need to do to move to the new versions. And we give people a basis of our experiences, what you can look for, pointing them to like Foundio, stuff like that that's out there to help them with different, because there's some security aspects of some of the new releases.
Sure.
So we help them with all that. And then so we get to that 90% adoption rate. And so that's why we can say, hey, look, we're ready to go on day one of this. I mean, our customers are not going to be. I mean,
they're like, slow down. We're still getting approval for 2023.
Yeah, exactly. So from a cloud provider perspective, and this is across all of the Adobe partners, it's not an xByte specific thing, is that our license is forever. We've been on subscription models from the get-go.
Right.
And so we get every new release. It's just part of our subscription.
Right.
And so our customers get that as well. And so it's not a decision, hey, am I going to buy this next version or how that's going to look? It's just incorporated into their monthly bills that they'll always have access to the upgrades.
Right. This is the point that Mark Takata made in his presentation on debunking Cold Fusion myths. It's not, a $1,900 license. It's a X dollars a month that gets amortized because of all the subscription pricing that you guys have proprietary with Adobe itself.
Correct. So so we negotiate those rates. And so they say, hey, based on, you can imagine our volume compared to other people. So we're going to get a certain rate and we can pass that off to our customers. And so it's a palatable, hey, I know I get upgrades forever. I want to be upgraded forever. I don't want to be on just this older version.
Right.
And a lot of on-prem customers, they're like, okay, thank you. Normally I have to convince my boss every couple years or every 5 years to do a new round of Adobe updates, and we're already 2 versions back at that point. Yeah. So if we can, we build it into them, and so there's not even a question. It's just I know I have access to all the updates whenever I want them.
Very cool. All right. Should we?
I think we can call it, right?
Let's call it there. I'm going to say this was successful.
Yeah, I think we're coining a phrase, freeforming it, but it's freeforming IT with a capital I. So because we loosely talk about IT stuff here, but a lot of it's IT.
If we can get Charvi to, I'm so curious as to how the sausage is made behind the scenes, but she'll probably never tell us about that. But I am curious. I just want to know how they consume, for example, the bug log or the feature request log. What is the funnel that goes from log to consideration to picking a particular release to development? I mean, I want to see behind that curtain.
We should ask. Well,
She'll be like, I can't talk about that. But she'll say it very nicely.
Exactly. And I'm like, all right, fine. But just email us. We'll tell people after. We won't cite you like an internal.
Yeah. Just between you and me. Just between you and me.
I'll be Charlie. This is like episode 4. It's almost between you and the 2 of us. No, we have more followers than that.
Good times.
I mean, my mom loves our podcast. All right.
On that note,
guys, audience, thank you for watching. We need to come up with a sign off or something. If you liked this one, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see an ability to click on links somewhere later on, somewhere over. My hand's not going through Ben's head. I think it's over there. Is the playlist.
Right. My camera is mirrored, so I think I'm probably pointing in the wrong direction all the time.
Ooh. Yeah, you can. Anyway,
no, I guess it's mirrored in the recording too. Then, so I don't know. Don't listen.
So here's what we'll do: so I'm pointing at this corner, and if the things appear where I think they're going to appear, then it'll be right.
There you go.
If I'm pointing at the wall,
I can point at the other corner.
If I'm pointing at the wall, then
one of us is lying. So it's a riddle.
And otherwise, if you're on any of the Apple Music or Spotify, subscribe, and you can listen to our stuff all the time. So thank you guys very much, and have a great week.
Cheers.